Hello everyone. Introductions, I'm Seymour and where's Liam gone? He's there. All right. We're going to tell you a little bit about Kilbride, which is the remains of a medieval church and some later, mainly 18th century structures, plus a historic churchyard situated 2 miles south of Oban. Though, of course, we have to bear in mind Oban is entirely a Victorian town, and in the times in which these buildings were created, all the population was actually down Lareg's Glen, where Kilbride is situated. We'll show you a short introductory film which has been made and produced entirely by volunteers. Then Liam's going to tell you something about the historic churchyard, and I'll tell you something about the buildings. Oops, sorry. Get the film started. No. So this film's not wanting to load. Brilliant. Thanks very much, Doug. Try that.
Do you want to put the coral on? A past too rich to have no future. Not a trite phrase made up by some academic from a university, but come up from our own volunteers. Friends of Kilbride bought the churchyard from a local farmer after many years of asking him to give us it and offered them small sums, and then eventually we put together a package of £15,000 and we bought the title to the graveyard, to the 325 people that are buried in there or recorded in there. My job this morning is not to talk about the structures and so forth, but tell you something about the people that are in there, why that past is so rich. This grave here, which is one of the older graves, is of a MacDougall of Corrie Lorne, it's called, and we don't know a lot about him, but we think that this stone here, when I say we, I mean academics. The academics think that this stone here is part of a large crucifix, or a large cross rather, and that this is only the headpiece. And we don't know very much about this MacDougall at all, though it's being researched at the moment. It was uncovered, as you can see the turf almost grows over the stone. We had, and one of the organisers is here today, we had a survey done of the graveyard, so we know there are 325 stones, we know there are several people on each stone. So we'll leave that one just as an example of a medieval stone, and we'll go on to the soldiers. This is a service that we held. A Canadian visitor came up to me on Charities Day in Oban. Are there any Canadians in your graveyard? And I said, no problem, come up tomorrow. Be in Oban, it'll be blowing a gale and pouring a rain, and we have a file, and we'll go through all of these sheets with all of these names, and I'll find out if there's any Canadians for you. And when she arrived, it was a pouring wet day, and I looked out the window of the house which lives next door, and I says, oh my God, Myra, to my wife, oh my God, here's this Canadian woman, I'll need to go out and stand in the rain. So I went out to the little kiosk we had, and I started at page 1, and as I showed someone this morning, we got to page 26, and there, inscribed at the bottom of an 18th century stone were the words, Hugh McIntyre, killed in action, 1917, 48th Highlanders of Canada. So I took the lady up into the graveyard, and as you can see the grasses and we've been advised to let the grass remain over the stones because they're protected that way, and when the funding becomes available we will go through a preservation process to make sure the information that's on the stone is preserved. I went up and I said, this will be it here, and I have a big old butcher's knife and I trim round the stones and I roll the turf back. Interestingly, when you roll the turf back, what's on the stone is grown into the turf as a mirror image, and you can actually read what's on the turf. And there the first words I saw were killed in action. But when I looked more carefully, the man killed in action was not called Hugh McIntyre, he was called Donald McCulloch, and he wasn't with the 48th Highlanders of Canada, he was with the Tank Corps. I had discovered the wrong grave, and I was one step away from Hugh McIntyre's. We're now 100% confident that there are only 2 First World War soldiers recorded in that graveyard, and the 2 of them lie almost side by side from 2 families totally unconnected. But just to show you the interest it creates, for this photograph here, you will see young Donald MacDougall up on the Piper in the background there, and there's 70 people at our memorial service which we held for these soldiers at this time last year, the 30th of October in fact, last year. 70 people turned up, including 25 people directly connected to the Hugh McIntyre. We were able to contact Hugh's relatives, his grandson, and he brought, when we organised the deal, they all turned up, 25 of them. We planted a tree and did all of that stuff. And the Piper there, the minister, Mr. Cameron, the soldiers are recorded, all 3 of them, as being Presbyterians, so the minister. So a past too rich to have no future. This is the past and the future. But the churchyard itself goes back to the 6th century. In writing, as it's told you in the film, it's recorded by Alexander II in 1246. Gravestones have been uncovered, such as the Corrie Lorne, which are 13th century through. There are no names on them, as you would not expect there to be, but there are images of various soldiers and so forth. Why we then go back to Corrylawn, if we could look at Corrylawn again, we'll move on to that. So here, this is academically interesting because it's part of what we think the size of that piece of stone there is approximately 1.5 meters, probably by 1 meter wide, and it's suspected that it continues on, or it did continue on, and then it was in a cruciform phase, because it's referred to in a document as the Corrylawn crucifix. So we think that it went on, and at some point it's been broken and removed. On the film you saw the image of an actual crucifix, and you would notice that was also broken in 3 parts. That stood nearby on the Drove Road, which goes right through the graveyard, or right alongside the graveyard. And we think it's part of the Reformation thing that went on, where what were seen as idolatrous items were removed and broken. That is definitely the case with the crucifix you saw, which is Archie Campbell's cross. It was cast down, and I quote, cast down as idolatrous, and it lay in the graveyard from 1615. He survived the Battle of Flodden. It lay in the graveyard till 1926, when Mrs. McNabb, a local resident, by public subscription had it re-erected, and you saw it nicely bound together with those bronze frames. So we think that that's part of a similar thing. So here, these two graves out of just those, I could speak forever about the graves, but these 2 graves show either end of the kaleidoscope of history that's written into the grass and under the turf in these places. Some other graves, how am I doing for time?
Get on to the Googles, I think.
Yep. Some other graves, the structure that stands beside the church was the McDougall Aisle. Do you want to bring up the McDougall Aisle? Is the McDougall Aisle. And very quickly, this is the entrance to the McDougall Aisle. This is their clan thing up the top. It's 1783. The keystone has a date on it. This stone here is Ian Keir MacDougall of MacDougall, Clan Chief MacDougall. That's his wife's stone, Mary of Sleat. He's on the other side, you can't see beside. He rose in 1715 as a Jacobite. He's on the right wing at Sheriff Muir. He's on the losing side, which is the wrong side in any battle, of course. He's on the run for a number of years. She's kicked out, driven out by Twisted Mouth, Campbell's. That's what it translates as. She's driven out and lives as a rural practitioner. She's a farmer of sorts on the island of Kerala. He's on the run, eventually on the way to enslavement in the West Indies. He is forgiven. He gets back and he returns to their castle as a tenant of Campbell. And then in 1744, the MacDougalls get their lands back, which they hold to this day. He dies in 1732. They bury him at Kilbride, and that's where the reference is made, where lies broken in 3 parts, the Lerig's cross. Mary of Sleat moves into a dower house, which is attached to this, just to the side of that. Sadly, it's not, the remains are still there of the dower house. Sadly, we didn't get that as part of the title. But now, these surrounding graves are all MacDougalls. But from then on, Clan MacDougall, important clan in the area, all their dead right up till the very recent 1950s and 1960s. Their dead are there. The current clan chief's father is buried and recorded in there in their private graveyard. So with Clan MacDougall, we've got all round about them. These are all MacDougalls round about them, of course, on the outside. And all the way round there's Campbell's. The noticeable thing about these graveyards, of anybody interested in graveyards, is that all the people that are buried are all what we would call today middle class. They're blacksmiths, they're tradesmen. There's no poor people there. They all have stones with their names on it, but although they were Gaelic speakers, all the names are in English and all the information is in English. There is one Gaelic stone, which you can barely read, and there's one stone in Latin, Requiescant in Pace, which is a Clan MacCallum stones, Requiescant in Pace in Latin, which we think indicates that they were a Catholic family. So that's the people that are buried at Kilbride. Okay,
Okay, so just briefly on the actual structures that remain. This, as Liam said, is the McDougall burial aisle, built in 17, the 18th century. Then has become the resting place now of all the McDougall chiefs. That is the headstone at the top, of the arms of Clan McDougall, which Liam referred to. As he said, the reason really why Ian Carr was buried at Kilbride was that it was where obviously his wife and he had been exiled to. He died, and then bad weather prevented them taking the corpse over to Ardcatton on the north side of Loch Etive, where the McDougalls were normally buried. And the body was actually beginning to decompose. So they buried him at Kilbride, and then Mary of Slate, his wife, was then also buried there in 1776. And then the McDougalls decided to move lock, stock and barrel, their burial ground, to Kilbride, where they are still buried to this day. This shows the state of the burial aisle at the point at which the charity was formed to start restoring the buildings. You can see it's almost entirely submerged in ivy. It took a lot of work by volunteers just to bring it to a stage at which you could even really just actually basically see what was there. This is it. I'd like to say this is in its current condition. That is it in the condition it was once the worst of the ivy and the weeds and the sycamores, etc., had been removed. But it's not now in its current state, because on that left-hand wall that has started to collapse and is now held up by a large and rather unsightly wooden buffer or buttress that you might have seen in the film. It's an indication of the trouble that the site is unfortunately in. Turning to the church itself, as Liam said, there's a reference to the Kilbride church in a document from Alexander II in 1246. And in fact, in 1249, Alexander II, who was having a rather a sort of standoff with the Bishop of the Isles, actually was on the point of moving the seat of the bishopric of the Isles from the island of Lishmore to Kilbride itself, which suggests that the building must have been a pretty substantial one in the 13th century, but there is almost no evidence really of that at all now, except there are 13th and 14th century stones quite clearly visible in the remaining structures, the subsequent ones, and also in several of the houses on Lureg's Glen, it has to be said. But we know the church itself was altogether demolished, at the latest by 1761, and then work started on this current prayer house in 1726, and this part is a scheduled monument. The original door in this, which is the one at the end, faced west, but that was actually straight into the prevailing wind, of course. So in 1744 it was bricked up and put in shut up, and a new door opened up in the east end, which is the opening you can see there. And then a session house was added in 1824 to the north wall, and then in 1876 the whole lot was partially dismantled to build the new combined church at Clee, which replaced both Kilbride and the church at Kilmore. And the remains were then prettified by the Victorians by curving the tops of all the remaining walls to give the appearance of a folly. And they also put a preservative layer of mortar on top of the walls, where they thought it was going to preservative. In fact, that has proved to be almost entirely counterproductive and is again a source of the deterioration of the building. And there you can see that's above the west door, the parlous state of the existing stonework in the prayer house. How long that will stay up, if not maintained, is anyone's guess, but I would have thought that in 20 years' time this site will probably just be a pile of stones unless we are able to raise our £200,000 capital renovation programme to preserve it. Liam, you were going to say a few words? Yep, you were going to say a few words in summary. That's what we said. Going to hold you to it, mate.
Why bother? Why do any of us bother? Why bother? Because it's important. The thing that I liked about the last presentation was the lady that did the presentation spoke so strongly about getting young people involved. If you don't know the mistakes that you made in the past, you'll make them in the future. And our whole aim as Friends of Kilbride is to involve the community. And again, I'm so full of respect and admiration for the people that spoke before us with their organisation in Portsoy. We held a Christmas party thinking, you know, a couple of the local kids would turn up. We had 80 children turn up last Christmas time. 80 kids turned up, and Santa Claus, and our clan chief, Madam McDougall of McDougall, and with great respect, Catherine, she's not a young lady anymore, and her husband's not a young lady, and they stayed on a winter's afternoon for 4 hours till it got dark enough for Santa Claus to light, because we light the church up, and the kids got to do the 5, 4, 3, 1 down. We also get visitors from all parts of, particularly of the former empire and the Commonwealth, but we get visitors from Europe as well, Germany. I looked up the last page in the visitors book, Germany, France and Sweden. In the middle of a November day when it usually rains in Oban, and if it's not raining it's because it's just going to start raining. It usually rains in Oban. So the interest is there. The interest is there from the diaspora. The interest is there from worldwide visitors who visit our wonderful glen. And the interest is there from academics. The interest is there from historic environment. Is there anyone here from the Heritage Lottery Fund? Because the interest unfortunately wasn't there from them. We didn't get the grant. So thank you very much for the time, and on behalf of Friends of Kilbride, I hope you find the project as necessary as we do. Thanks very much.